second. And it tells me the meeting is being recorded. They missed my first part. That was really cool. But, you know, the idea that so much of what we have to do now in our today's time revolves around what we consider to be a highly educated workforce. And I guess I just want to start out by kind of telling you the way we're looking at that in Kentucky and the importance of this collaborative and your knowledge to be a part of that. You know, it's been clear over the last several years, at least since I've taken over this position, that for us to have, we hear people talk about a strong economy and what we've done here in Kentucky and what we're going to continue to do to say that in order to have a strong, thriving, sustainable economy, you have to have a strong, thriving, educated workforce. I mean, all the data, all the research shows that. That's not, I mean, so much so that it's more than a correlation, it's really causal. Something Joe Cuzio wouldn't know about as a social psychologist. But that is what that means. And in order to have that, you have to have a strong, sustainable higher education system. And for us to have that, we have to have a student success process that goes, yes, true to the outcome items we want, quantitative outcomes, more people graduating with more credentials that count and so on. But that counts matters. We have to talk about quality. And in order to measure quality, we have to know the inputs that we're giving the students that they feel that they're getting, as well as employers and other folks. So the collaborative is really this centralized place that we're using truly as a primary way of not just being a resource to our campuses, but truly being a great thought innovator, if you want to call it that, more than just intervention, but innovation. You know, how we look at what we offer that can tweak something that may be in research that makes it specific to how we do what we do better. And so that's what this is about. We have a goal set, as you all know, it's 60 by 30, and this goal didn't come just by happen chance. It's really designed on a strong set of data, analytics that points us to that outcome we want in Kentucky by 2030. I'm proud to say we're on trajectory and one of the top states now, I think number 3 in increasing attainment. But we're also on trajectory in some of our areas on closing gaps, maybe faster than any other state, but we still have gaps. We still have the adult learner issue, which is huge. The low income item that we've been able to keep steady and many states haven't, so we can brag about that a little bit, but it's still not getting where they need to go. We're doing really well with our underrepresented, underserved people of color, but we got a long way to go there too, in my opinion. But in Kentucky, we're focused heavily on those outcomes in our new strategic agenda that Lee's going to talk about in a little bit, but we are doing that with you all truly as a core of conversation, and not just of conversation, but as I said a minute ago, of innovation. So, you know, I'm proud to be the head of higher ed for Kentucky, but I'd be more proud if we did the things that we need to do at a much faster pace along those lines. But at the core of this, in my opinion, are the students that we're serving. And how do we look at the student as a whole person? And how do we look at them as a way, not just as an outcome measure, but someone that we can see based on where they're at. I call it cultural competence, based on what they're bringing to the table and how we increase the likelihood of their success, both quantitatively and qualitatively. And so that's our purpose, that's our charge. And so this is our first meeting. So I did want to take a minute just to kind of at least introduce to you from where I'm coming from as the person who's been assigned to lead this charge about what those pieces are. And before I turn it over to Lee in a second, I just want to shut up. And since I got like 2 or 3 minutes left, it looks like by my clock, and see if there's any questions you want to ask of me before we fully get engaged in the process that we invited you here today to be engaged with.
Aaron?
Yes, sir.
You know, reading the strategic plan and your comments today. You've made a lot of progress. Number 3, in terms of gains over the last decade. I read in the report, most of that gain you attribute to work certifications, industry certifications. I guess my question is two-part. If it's too heavy to deal with now, maybe you can direct me to a website or something. What interventions do you think have accounted for the significant gains over the last decade in Kentucky, particularly in the certificates and what do you call them, in industry certification outcomes? What interventions do you think are in place that made that happen? And why have they not, those interventions spilled over to produce comparable gains in the 4-year sector? Is that
Actually, they have, Joe, and I'm happy to answer that. So the bottom line, there's 4 things, and they'll get more into this later on. There's 4 things. First of all, it's not just purely industry certifications. They are those certifications that employers are wanting now. So they're not industry certification purely from a standpoint of saying, well, they're getting Microsoft credentials. They are certifications to the high demand sectors in Kentucky that we put people in sustainable wages in. That's one thing. The second thing is that over the last 3.5 years or so, since I've been in this role, we've also started defining our 4-year institutions as workforce institutions. And we've defined our 2-year institutions as workforce institutions, but they have to have also those employability skills in place. They need to have those quote unquote people skills, soft skills too. So we're incorporating all of that within the context of that. Number 3, your point about 4-year institutions, we're down to 50% college going rate. So many of our 4-year institutions inside of the state have actually had dwindling enrollment tremendously, but their degree output is huge. So you need to look at those numbers. Actually, not only have it spilled over, they actually are outproducing by relative comparison. Almost all of our institutions now are at 80% retention rate. Who would have ever thought that in a state that has a lot of students that are not necessarily rich? So we're producing more outputs from our inputs than we ever had before across, including graduate education. So don't let the nominal numbers fool you as far as the overall proportional output, because they're all doing it. So you're seeing numerically certifications kind of moving that agenda, but you're also seeing percentage-wise and numerically the 4-year institutions doing the same. Now, don't get me wrong, number 4, we have to increase all of those. And we have to measure to see if those certifications, and we just got through doing a huge study on this, if they are producing the quality that we want, not just the quantity of the number. So we're not just looking at our numbers here. Many states are probably just looking at the numbers. We're looking at, are they quality credentials truly from a holistic viewpoint of the student? Does that make sense?
Yes, if I can quick follow up, I don't want to throw the whole meeting off. There was a part of my question, I don't know if you can direct me to a website. What interventions would you highlight as being most instrumental in producing the gains?
Well, this group's going to talk about a lot of those, but we've had many. One is that we look at each institution where they're at and then do a baseline. There's what I call the 3 big elements here, but there's a lot working within those, Joe, that we'll talk about and websites can help you. First of all, our performance funding model is really targeted around increasing credentials, true enough, but especially for those that are the most disenfranchised. So it has a heavy equity component to it, okay? And in that equity component, I'm just going to talk about one of it. One of the tiers that we have is on the other end of this is our diversity policy that says that you not only have to increase with numbers, but you have to make the campus culturally competent to invite anybody that wants to be on that campus. So it's more than just whether or not you're producing the numbers. Do they want to come to your campus and do they feel at home when they get there? And so on that back end of that diversity policy, if you don't achieve the plan that we set with you, including community colleges, as Bethkin said, you get no programs, no new programs.
Right.
So there's a carrot and a stick. But the big thing is our strategic agenda that lies what I call in between. So we have put in place in that agenda a set of working operational best practices that go from everything from, you've been involved with this, Joe, from implementing things like first year programs to intrusive advising to all of those things that you can imagine that we've done as far as those inputs go. So those are in place, but those operationalizes itself in all three of those areas. The performance funding, in the persistence, you get paid if they persist, you get paid if they graduate. If you happen to graduate a person of color with a STEM degree, you're going to get paid 4 times the amount. It's actually more than that, actually. It's like 20 times the amount. Then if you just got one credential out. So at Forster campuses, in a nice way, campuses, I love you, you know that. We don't force you to do anything. You go along with us as partners. You know, to look at what can we do to increase those outputs that helps all of our citizens in the state. And same way with our community colleges. Is that a piece of an answer?
Yes, and my motive for asking is if one of the goals is to innovate and augment what you already have done rather than replicate or duplicate what you've already done. That was my motive. I wanted to get a sense of what was in place so then we could have a good idea of where we could tweak, augment, complement what's already been done.
Well, I'm going to finish with this because I know I'm going to get us behind here. Joe and I tend to get people behind, but I blame Joe. But I mean, there's also ways of enhancing. Now, we have first year programs that we've done, but it's not done with fidelity across the state. It's not done on our community colleges with fidelity. So, Joe, I mean, because we have it, that doesn't mean that we're doing it at the level that we can get the biggest outputs on. So I don't want you to think that we want to just move away from those. I want us to really be able to look at, evaluate, gap analysis, for a lack of a better phrasing here, in addition to all that. Does that make sense?
Yes, very helpful. Thanks. Sorry I gobbled up so much time.
Oh, no problem. But I'm happy to answer any questions along the way, but I'm going to turn it over to Lee Nimitz now. He's probably mad I took up 5 minutes or 3 minutes.
Curious.
Before we jump in, I thought I had put introductions into the agenda, but perhaps this would be a great time for everyone to, you know, I know that the several folks from the advisory group have been on the panel together in October during the launch, or have met some of us in different contexts over the years, but, you know, perhaps it'd be great if we did just kind of go around the Zoom room and share a little bit about ourselves. That would be really helpful. And I don't mind kicking it off. I'm Lily Mass-McKinley with the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative. And
Lily, I'm so sorry you asked me to do that, but Joe once again threw us off. So for those who don't know me, I'm Aaron Thompson. I'm president. Yeah. Deborah, you're up next in the corner, I think.
Okay, Deborah Humphreys. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Engagement at Lumina Foundation, where I've been for about 5 years. Prior to that, and a number of different roles at the Association of American Colleges and Universities for about 23 years. Happy to be part of the group.
I'm Beth Kennington.
Oh, okay.
Beth Kennington.
I'm just going to let y'all go around. I'll shut up.
Beth Kennington with the Kentucky Student Support Success Collaborative.
Well, I'll go. I'm Travis Powell. I'm Vice President General Counsel at CPE. In addition to my legal duties, I have some other non-legal duties, and one of those is overseeing our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy that Dr. Thompson mentioned earlier.
My name is Adriana Kizar, and I'm a professor at the University of Southern California and director of the Pullius Center, where we do a lot of research that relates to the success of low-income, racialized minority, and students, and look at issues of equity on campus. Nice to be here.
It's like double Dutch. You're trying to figure out if we're going to get in. So, I guess I'm Amelia Parnell. I work at NASPA, which is a National Membership Association for Student Affairs, and my role there is Vice President for Research and Policy. I know many of you and look forward to working with you over the months ahead.
Hello, my name is Naima Mitchell. I'm a director at JFF. My pronouns are she, her. I've been at JFF for about 4 years, working a lot with the Student Success Center network for several years. And now I've shifted into a slightly different role where most of my work is with the Pathways to Prosperity group, which many of you may be familiar with. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to someone. Allison.
That's good.
Well, look at that. I'm going to do that too. Hi, I'm Allison Cadlick, founding partner of SOVA. SOVA is about 5-6 years old. Before that, I led the higher education and workforce programs at Public Agenda for 13 years. I use she, her pronouns, and I live and work from Anishinaabe land in Northwest Michigan. Oh, and I'm handing it off to, this is fun, this Hollywood Square. Lee.
Who is that?
To you, yes.
Oh,
To you.
hey, sorry, I didn't get the name. Lee Nemux. I'm Vice President and Chief of Staff with CPE, and I'm going to talk to you in just a minute about our strategic agenda.
And Lee's going to hand it over to me. And I'm Melissa Bell, Vice President of Academic Affairs and Student Success here at the Council. And I had the pleasure of working with Lily and the staff at the Success Collaborative. And just to give you all some context, we invited everyone from CPE's executive leadership here. So that is why you're joined by the CPE staff. And I will turn it over to Amanda Ellis.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Ellis. I'm the Associate VP over K-12 Policies and Programs. So I'm the dot connector as we get students to engage in post-secondary decision-making and transitions into our institutions. So it's a pleasure to be with you today. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Fraker, and I work with Amanda in K-12 policies and programs and also in government relations. With that, I'll turn it to Phyllis.
I love this. Hi, everybody. I'm Phyllis Clark. I've been with the Success Collaborative for 3 months now. Can't believe it. It seemed like 3 days. But having a lot of fun learning about all of this work and getting to know you all, and looking forward to what's in store. And duck, 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 goose, Nicholas.
I love that. We were just playing Duck, Duck, Goose last night when we got a 5- and 7-year-old. I'm Nick Hillman, and I really appreciate being part of this team. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I direct a small research lab that's embedded in our Division of Enrollment Management, which includes the Registrar's Office, Financial Aid, and Admissions and Recruitment. And so I'm trying to find ways to connect our academic research with practice in my own backyard. Let's see. I don't know. Joe, you've kind of gone.
I deliberately waited to be last because I dominated the first half of the program thus far. Joe Kuzel, Professor Emeritus. I had been put out to pasture Marymount, California University. My interests over the years have been for transitions, particularly the first-year transition, collaboration between academic and student affairs. And I've collaborated with Dr. Thompson on a lot of college success and diversity-related work over the years, which is, I guess, why he feels so comfortable humiliating me in public here, because we have a long history together. Oh, did we lose audio?
No, I think you're supposed to introduce who's not been.
Oh, yeah, Lee. I guess Lee does her thing now. Oh, I'm sorry. You control the agenda.
Has Adriana, have you gone?
Yes, she has. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe just Bill and Lisa?
Oh, yeah.
I know Bill, he might be just tuned in. Bill's with finance, and Lisa's with our communications team. She was hoping to grab, I think, a screenshot of everybody smiling.
Lisa, make me look good.
Okay, I think with that, we can turn it back over to Lee. Thank you so much, Lee, for running through part of our strategic agenda. I will go ahead and share that presentation. And then, oh, good.
Well, I know we have captured your time to get your input, and you're not here to hear us talk. So I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. You all should have gotten a copy of the strategic agenda, the new strategic agenda in your packets. We simply wanted to run through this. We thought it would be helpful to have this framework in place as you start to consider the work of the Student Success Collaborative. But just to give you a little historical background, this is actually the 6th iteration of Kentucky's public agenda, or strategic agenda as we call it. It came about back in 1997. Kentucky higher education really went under a major reform into some profound concerns about the state's low educational attainment level, extreme levels of poverty, and really candidly a lack of state level coordination and leadership. So the Reform Act did a number of things. It created our community and technical college system, which has really helped drive, Joe, I think, a lot of the certificates and associate degrees that we've seen over the last really 20 years. But one of the things that's probably lesser known is that it really did attempt to shore up state level coordination and oversight of the higher education system. So Kentucky SHEO agency at the time was dissolved, and CPE, our organization, was created. Probably CPE's primary responsibility was to develop a statewide agenda to create, really to sort of unify the vision for higher education and set a common set of priorities and goals that are aligned to the broader needs of the state. So it put in place a pretty robust accountability system that has certainly helped us at the state level, but also helped policymakers and the general public understand whether or not we're hitting the marks we need to make and whether or not we're making progress as a whole. So, I mean, all of you on this call are very familiar with state level agendas, and it seems fairly basic now. But really back in 1997, this idea of a public agenda, which was driven by the needs of the citizens rather than by what the campuses want or what they needed, was really something pretty new. And, I have been around an awfully long time, and I will say that our agendas over the years have really helped drive the work that we have done both at the state and campus level. So now for nearly a quarter of a century. In terms of the process for developing this new agenda, we've been at it for about a year, working with the campuses and folks in the state and actually some national partners. The board adopted the agenda at their last meeting, and we're going to be doing a formal launch later this month. Next slide, Lily. So the new agenda is framed around key priorities for the system that respond really to where Kentucky is right now in terms of the challenges that the state is facing. And it's going to run through 2030, and we're going to have major reviews at the end of 2024 and 27 to make sure it's still focusing on the things that we want it to focus on and what Kentucky needs. Next slide, please. So as part of the development process, we revisited the state's mission, vision, and values for the higher ed system. The new mission and vision really reflect, they're not profoundly different, but they do reflect a stronger focus on ensuring equity of opportunity and equity of outcomes. They also emphasize higher ed's role in breaking cycles of intergenerational poverty and preparing students to be lifelong learners. This has always been implied or implicit in past agendas, but we really wanted to elevate these things in this current agenda and let these issues really drive some of the work that we're doing. The values recognize the importance of institutional collaboration, again, something we're elevating, and something that this collaborative obviously is really meant to embody. We also understand the need for more comprehensive student support systems and a renewed focus on business partnerships. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Thompson mentioned, the agenda continues to embrace the big educational attainment goal, which we set back in, I guess, 2015 or 16, to ensure that at least 60% of the working age population has earned at least some post-secondary credential. And, we're basing this on the work of Lumina, as well as a lot of analysis that we've done over the years here in Kentucky. As Dr. Thompson mentioned, we are making steady progress, and we want to embrace that and celebrate that. But, the next 8 years are going to be a huge challenge. I don't think Kentucky is alone in this, but, our high school population is declining, as is, Dr. Thompson mentioned, our college going rate, probably more so than other states, and it's something of great concern to us. We've also got large regions of our state where jobs just simply are not plentiful. And so there is this effort to motivate our citizens to continue education and training as a pathway to greater prosperity. Next slide, please. So we've got 5 key priority areas, which I'm going to touch on briefly in a second. But, this agenda really has put equity at the center of our work. And this equity focus really is threaded through all areas of the agenda. So the slide shows, attainment levels, and these are associate degree and above by race, ethnicity. And although, we are making, I think, big gains in enrollment and degree production in underrepresented minorities in recent years, we haven't broken through on the educational attainment level. And so you see it really, not keeping pace with white citizens. But just as an aside, as you think about this work, I should also add that our white populations, particularly in rural areas, fall way behind national averages on educational attainment at all levels. So, we have a lot of work to do to ensure Kentuckians benefit from the kind of inclusive and supportive programs that we hope will put them on a path to a good job. Next slide, please. So we have 5 strategic priority areas. The first is affordability. This has always been part of past agendas, but not, at the level, the pillar level that it is in this agenda. Concerns about college costs, as you well know, are real. Folks are very vocal about these issues. And we just felt like it needed to be elevated within our conversations and with our policy focus. So we know that the affordability barriers facing students are both real and perceived. And by that, I mean, we know there's a real cost of going to college, and it is forcing students to drop out or stop out or not enroll, or perhaps enroll in an institution that might not be the best fit. But, we also know that the affordability issues that at least Kentuckians are facing is also about really a profound lack of knowledge and about perceptions that perhaps aren't correct. So, we simply make it too hard to understand the ins and outs of financial aid. And we are simply not as transparent as we need to be about things like college pricing. So in this area, we have 2 big objectives. None are earth-shattering, but they do provide a framework to allow a lot of work under each one. One is to reduce financial barriers to college, and the second is to improve the public's understanding about how to pay for college. We've developed some high-level strategies that support each of these, but we'll be looking to groups like yours to really help us flesh out action steps and plans to help us move the dial. So high-level strategies in this area include much better communications with students and teachers and others about paying for college. We really want to kick up our FAFSA completion rate. We have the power here at CPE to moderate tuition and fee increases, or even limit them or halt them. And we certainly want to look at that very closely. And we also want to get very strategic with both our institutional and state need-based aid programs. Next slide, please. So the second strategy is about strengthening and streamlining our key transition points for students. So a lot of our work right now is being done between K-12 and post-secondary. But we also need to improve transition points for adult learners who are really struggling with that decision about re-entering or entering a post-secondary program. As we talked about before, Kentucky's seeing a steady decline in our on to college rates. And I'll tell you, over the past several years, the number of adult learners attending post-secondary education institutions has absolutely plummeted in Kentucky. And some of these are certainly influenced by the pandemic, but some have been going on for a number of years, and it's just sort of it's an accelerating decline that we're concerned about. So in terms of objectives, we want to increase students' readiness to enter post-secondary education and just, very candidly increase enrollment in the post-secondary system. High-level strategies that we have been thinking about or working on include expanding and improving early college opportunities, better outreach and advising, and streamlining the post-secondary admissions process. I mean, very candidly, we just make it too hard for for folks to go to college. Next slide, please. So the next priority area is about student success, which has been at the heart of our agenda for years, and it's really still at the core of our work. While we have graduation rates and completion rates are increasing, and the numbers of students graduating are growing, we still are not getting enough students to the finish line, particularly in our low income and underrepresented minority populations. So this priority area captures a lot of our work and focus, and it's certainly going to be core to the work of the Success Collaborative. So we want to do three things here in terms of our objectives. We want to increase persistence and timely completion. We want to maximize transfer, and we want to look at the relevancy and quality and inclusivity of our academic offerings. Some of the key strategies that we've included in the agenda, and some that the Student Success Collaborative, certainly are going to be deeply involved in, is sharing emerging and proven practices. This idea of creating more systemness in Kentucky to share ideas, build on the strengths of other institutions is really going to be core to what the collaborative will be doing. We want to zero in on the needs and services for adult non-traditional learners, something we haven't done very well systematically in Kentucky. And again, we want to ensure that our programs are inclusive and equity focused. Next slide, please. So this strategic priority area is about this connection between the work of post-secondary education and the state's workforce and economic development needs. It's about creating alignment. It's helping guide students to a career path that makes sense for them. And it's also about, capitalizing on the talent capacity in terms of research and teaching and administrative talent on our campuses. We want to, in terms of the objectives, improve career outcomes of our graduates and also increase research and service to support stronger communities. Among the strategies, we really want to infuse many of our academic programs with a work-based learning or talent-relevant experience. We want to work with our campus to improve career advising earlier in the process. And we're also looking more at the data capacity we have to understand what our individual communities and regions need in terms of academic programming to support businesses and industry. Next slide, please. So the last strategic priority is about helping shift and improve the public and decision maker perceptions and understanding about post-secondary education. So it's about communicating the value of higher education, not just to prospective students, but to all the community leaders, the influencers, decision makers. It's about engaging the public really in a conversation about return on investment, and really to begin to create a public dialogue about the importance of post-secondary education to Kentucky's future. So in terms of objectives, we want to really develop strategies and efforts to increase the public belief in the power of post-secondary education. And we want to, in a very material way, build support for greater investment in post-secondary education. One of the things that we'll be launching along with the strategic agenda later this month is a broad-based statewide Higher Education Matters campaign, which is all about communicating why somebody in Pikeville, Kentucky, who might have lost their job in a mine or wherever, why higher education, why post-secondary education is going to be important to them, why it's important to their community. So stay tuned for that. We hope that this will be a first step in this process of building the value proposition for higher education in Kentucky. So with that, I am going to answer any questions you might have. That's a lot. I mean, we could spend a couple of years talking about this. Or I can turn it back over, Lily, to you, and we can use this as a jumping off point to talk about how the collaborative really drives a lot of this work in a key way.
Sure. Does anybody have any initial kind of thoughts, responses? Yes, Deborah.
Yeah, Lee, I was wondering how much discussion has gone on around the adequacy of your data in terms of returning adult students. So we've been working with a number of partners trying to, and I know you guys through your Adult Promise work have done some really great work on sort of marketing to adult students, but we're trying to go even further with that in literally trying to identify who people are, what prior learning they already have, to really build both outreach and on-ramps that are super tailored to the kind of people who can most benefit and who actually intend to go to college or want to go to college, but just don't know how to get there. So can you say a little bit about, is that a priority that that this group wants to work on? Is that something someone else is working on? What's your thinking about that?
Well, I will tell you, it certainly is a priority for the council. And I think to the extent that the collaborative embraces any sort of strategic approaches to reaching out to our adult learners, I think it's going to be really important. We in Kentucky, as you'll learn, as you may already know, we are blessed with a wonderful data infrastructure, a longitudinal data system that allows us to really dive deep into individuals and their pathways, and really helps us, hopefully develop some very strong policies and programs. We have not yet tapped into that at the level we need to address the issues that you're raising. I would say too that there's some interesting private sector folks out there who are using some political databases that are able to really understand through algorithms the characteristics of individuals. You can actually zero into somebody's household, and they've developed some, sort of predictive analytics about whether that household would be likely to go back to post-secondary. So we're not there yet, but I could foresee a time that we could use that for marketing purposes.
Got it.
Deborah,
Yeah, we're working with
I
them
did
too,
want
so.
to say this. I think your question is exactly the kinds of questions of innovation that we want to hear, because we do have a robust data set, and it's central to what we're doing. So the idea that how then do we, this is a great example of people like you coming to the table, by the way. I mean, the knowledge you can bring to us to help us to know how to do that is essential to the way that we want to do that. I think Naima had a question.
And Amelia did too, Aaron.
Okay.
Yeah, Aaron, I think that's a nice segue, because I have a comment and a question, but I'll try to do both briefly. First off, Lee, thank you for the presentation. I think as someone who doesn't have a strong connection very often to Kentucky, I think it was a nice overview of kind of where your priorities are and where you want to emphasize your work. So my suggestion really is at the very, very first of your priorities where you had equity on that chart. I think that's nice for an introductory message of where your priorities are and how you want to segment those by race. But I think there may be an underlying additional set of narratives or context that I think will be helpful. So for example, it's nice to see by racial category how students are doing right now, but it would be nice to also see maybe a supplemental chart or two that shows some trends. So maybe over the last few years. So it feels like, I think maybe internally you have an idea of whether those numbers are trending upward for some and maybe downward for others. Aaron, you mentioned that in the beginning, so you know where your trouble spots are, where your opportunities for improvement are. I think that would help to supplement that with just maybe one or two more to provide some context. And maybe there's a sprinkle of good news. I tend to also be a little bit nervous when all of it is deficit laden. Everybody's failing. Let's see how we can bring them up. So that's just a suggestion. On the second, it's related to the end part of the presentation about the belief in public higher education. This is probably a broader thing. I find that still, regardless of all the things that we're doing, one of the leading reasons why someone would be hesitant is the cost. And so I'm wondering if there's any strategic conversation you've been having about that last element of your plan for how to respond to those who say, yes, you've sold me on the idea that it's helpful, but I simply cannot afford it. How might you get around that? Not asking if you figured out the solution to the expensive nature of higher education, but instead how you might weave that into your plan.
Yeah, I think it's all about elevating data that tells the story of the return on investment. Because, higher education is not an expenditure. I mean, it's an investment. And I think if we can help students and policymakers and others create that mind shift to understand that there is going to be a return, and we have to be much better about articulating what that return is. And it's certainly monetary, and that's what resonates. But I think all of the other things that we're almost tired of hearing ourselves talk about, to be honest. And so we don't say it enough. But we have to say it enough. We have to say it more, and we have to talk to students where they're coming from. And, so for me, at least, and Dr. Thompson, I know that you've thought deeply about this. It is all about better communication about how this is going to change their lives and why, at the end of the day, this relatively small investment on the front end will yield big results for their life down the road.
And I think just to finish answering that question, we have those charts. As a matter of fact, as a data guy, some of you know, Deborah knows, Joe knows, we have all those, we have trajectories, we have all, trend analysis, all that. Just Deborah's laughing because she knows me too well. So we have all that, but as far as presentation, happy to include that. The point you make, though, is the bigger point toward the end. One is the affordability issue, which comes in two forms, right? One is the perception that they can't afford to go to college, which is the whole about the value of higher education and communicating that to those historically that's been left out, but to everybody, right? So we're working on a lot of that too, like college and career advisors going into the high school. I mean, we've got so much stuff on that, it's unbelievable. But number two, there is a real issue of affordability. And so the idea that in the last 3 years and 4 years, we'll have the lowest tuition in the history that we have, averaging somewhere less than 1%. So that's one piece of it. That's a perception piece as well as a real piece too. But we also now have every one of our universities giving more scholarship money than they bring in federal and student aid in many ways. That they're bringing in. So every one of them have a promise program too now, which is good. But we also have free community college that no one knows about. So a lot of that's still around communication. So there is a perception in Kentucky more than ever of two things. One is that higher education isn't as valuable as it should be. Now we've increased that, which is good. We increased that knowledge. But the other is that they can't afford to go even if they wanted to go. And so your points are clearly active in our minds, but that leads to Amanda and Jennifer and others talking about how do we make this a systematic approach. You just can't be higher ed talking about this, right? It has to be our P12 folk with us. It has to be our employers working with us and so on. So a lot of the strategies around student success and the quality argument falls within our strategic agenda around this, but also falls on y'all's back, not falls, but we ask you all to help us to think about some of those. To think about how do we get the maximum input and output out of that. Data tends to not be our problem. And in Kentucky, I'm really happy with our analytics too, but we still have a lot more analytics to work with that Deborah pointed out that could help us to really pinpoint where we need to go. Long answer, and I know we're putting people behind, but that was an excellent question and suggestion.
Naima had a question, I think. I don't mean to orchestrate, I'm just trying to remember.
Yes, thank you.
Joe, you can't help it. Sorry, Naima.
I just want to echo Amelia's thanks to Lee. This was a great overview for someone else who is less familiar with the work in the state. So I also want to sort of caution us in our discussions about equity and the equity gap to not use white as the standard. I think that that's become a very common practice across the field, but you've already established the standard, right? Like the goal is 60%. And so I think it can be helpful when you're looking at disaggregated data and thinking about what are the different groups that are where they're falling in that effort to achieve that 60%. I am sorry, my children are home, so you hear that screaming. As you strive to get that for those specific groups, and you're going to be designing policies and specific efforts towards supporting a particular group, that you can do that without sort of saying, this is how far behind they are of our white students. So I think that's just sort of a messaging thing and a framing thing that I think it's important to see the data and to see it across all of the different racial groups, but to not use them as a compare and sort of interracial comparison point. You have the standard, it's the 60%, and that's what we're looking toward. And what can we do to help various subgroups beyond even like race, like sort of even drilling down into that if we were focused on Black male veterans or, Black female mothers or anything, like just sort of thinking of it that way versus what we have established as the standard.
I appreciate that. That's very helpful, and we will address that as we move forward and do these presentations.
May I just ask one quick question in addition to the good ones that have already been asked? I'm looking at ways you kill multiple birds with the same stone. I may be reading too much into this. Aaron, did you say community college is free in Kentucky at this point? No tuition? Or did I
We
miss
have
something?
free, basically, overall technical college in our community college system. And in that, you can get a lot of those courses. But also, Kentucky, even though we have a high tuition, which Amelia is an interesting issue for our community colleges, the way it's designed with the student aid input, we actually are free in that too, that most of our students have money coming back to them. The problem is that we haven't done a very good job, Joe, on communicating the net price and the affordability of all of those. We've done a good job of controlling them from an actual affordability standpoint, but we haven't done a good job of letting people know how to maneuver the system and the process and the understanding of how to take advantage of it. Does that make sense?
Yes. What I was driving at was trying to connect the affordability issue with the emphasis on transfer, which I think is part of your, would it be safe to say from a strict affordability standpoint that a Kentucky student pursuing a baccalaureate, who did their associate degree work at a community college and transferred, that would be a more affordable financial path for them than someone who went directly to a four-year institution? Would that be fair to say?
It's more than fair to say. Not only is that the case, Joe, all of our institutions also give a transfer scholarship into that. Even if they didn't, it would be a more affordable way by far. But even beyond that, they give transfer scholarships from our KCTCS camp. And we have, on top of that, we have one of the best working seamless transfer systems in the country that we put into law in 2010. So there's all kinds of reasons why you would want to think of it that way as far as a theater. And guys, I have to get off for a while. The governor's office just called me, so I'm assuming it's something fairly important. So I'll talk to you all.
Thanks. May I ask, are Kentuckian students taking advantage of that community college option?
Well, just a little bit of background on that, Joe. It's something called the Kentucky Work Ready Scholarship. And it was designed really to give access to our technical programs at our community and technical colleges. And it just was not publicized at all. And so for the first couple of years, we had a very low uptake. We have CPE and some other folks have really tried to drive some attention to it. We're starting to see more people take advantage of it. We're also looking at CPE about whether or not there's value in expanding eligibility beyond the straight technical programs to really provide greater access to more students. We're also, right now there's, it's a promise program, so there's no income eligibility, but because of that, perhaps the students who might not need to benefit so much from it are benefiting. So that's something else we want to look at.
Why the emphasis on transfer then? Are you seeing, I see that as an objective in your strategic plan. Are not enough Kentucky students capitalizing on that seamless process that
That's
Aaron
right.
seems to be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got, I don't know, Melissa, I'm looking at you. We've got the vast majority of our KCTCS students in transfer programs. So associate degree programs that are meant to be transfer programs. So they wouldn't, they're the ones who wouldn't qualify for the Work Ready Scholarship.
I
And
see.
they're simply not transferring at the level that we need them to. So
Thanks.
Melissa, am I right there? I don't want to jump out in
Yeah,
front of you.
so it mirrors what you see nationally. And we have, as Aaron said, as Dr. Thompson said, we do have a great policy, but a lot of it comes down to the practice, and we're looking into ways that we can build upon that policy and help the institutions with the practices. So how do we create these degree pathways that you start at a community college and you finish it? And that ties into a lot of the stuff actually that the collaborative is doing with guided pathways and with purpose first advising, knowing what you want to do first and building a pathway to that. And Lily will talk about that in just a minute.
Yeah, I didn't mean to take that up on a tangent. I was trying to connect it back to the affordability issue. For a Kentucky students who's aspiring to a baccalaureate degree, the community college transfer path to that degree might be a more affordable option than a straight entry into the four-year system. That's why I didn't mean to take us up far. I was trying to link the two as perhaps joint objectives that could be met simultaneously. I'm done, thanks.
That was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I think that it is so important to get a sense of that context, because the collaborative, being a brand new initiative, working from a brand new strategic agenda for Kentucky, we have a lot of kind of pathways to choose from. There's a lot of work to do out there. And, we're still early in this journey of identifying what are those campus priorities, or how can we really reinforce the work of the campuses, but aligned with the best practices in the field and the things that will point us toward our goals with the CPE strategic plan. I'm happy to transition now and share a little bit of just an update on the collaborative from some of my individual conversations with you all, which happened anywhere from like early October through mid-December. And, I feel like a lot has happened, but we're still only about 3 months old. So, we have a lot of growing to do. And I welcome Beth or Phyllis, my colleagues, to jump in, because certainly we all have different areas of expertise and have different pieces of this puzzle that we're moving forward. Let me just share here. Okay. And we are, a little different than my projected timelines. There's about 30 minutes left of our meeting. So I'm going to probably go through this a little bit quicker just to make sure we have plenty of time for your questions and advice conversations for the end. But really, there's two pieces of our mission that I really focus on. And one of those is like building the capacity of our partners. And so strengthening the actual folks, boots on the ground on our campuses, to drive that change. And then the second is helping them accelerate that progress. So they all have a myriad programs and initiatives that they're running. How can partnering with the collaborative help accelerate that work? And, just kind of doubling down and reinforcing CPE's priorities. We are really here as one approach or one strategy to improve completion rates, eliminate and reduce equity gaps, and then strengthen the workforce connection for our students. What I love is that the collaborative is in the name of our work. And so everything that we do is about that we really firmly believe we can do more together than any of us can do individually. And we do have a lot of silos and just folks, maybe doing the same type of work, but just in different campuses, maybe even in the same city, and they just have no idea and they're not talking. And so really that's one of our primary charges, is to bring folks together, to facilitate and foster these conversations, and then to help them build their work going forward, or help support their work going forward. We've had, I think there's 24 public campuses in Kentucky, 16 of our community and technical college campuses, and then 8 public higher education four-year institutions. And we are on our road trip right now. We met with about 8 of them in this fall semester, and we're hoping to meet with another kind of 8 to 10 this spring, especially those campuses that have already jumped into one of the initiatives that we have moving, so that we can really get a good sense of where they are, what their priorities are, what their challenges are. And then as we're listening for these common themes around the energy, where's their energy in their work, also what are common themes and barriers that they're facing or experiences they're having, then that can really help guide the professional development that we offer, the communities of practice that we convene, the online resources that we share, as well as, I think, inviting in campuses where it's most relevant for them to participate in the technical assistance partnerships that we have with some national organizations. And then additionally, I mentioned the building capacity of our campuses to accelerate and lead their own change. How do we kind of incorporate that in or integrate that change leadership, change management tools and skill sets into these initiatives that we're helping move forward? So there's kind of 4, I would say, really kind of deep dive areas that we're working in right now, or that are at least like kicking off imminently. And one of those is in partnership with Complete College America. We are working with 9 campuses in Kentucky on the Purpose First initiative. That's 4 of our public 4 years, 4 private 4 years, and 1 2-year institution. And they are really focused on that kind of student matriculation through first-year experience, and weaving in a really intentional and universal design way this career exploration connected to their academic decision-making, connected to their experiential learning plans, et cetera, so that students do have a strong career orientation as they're joining their campus. And then I've also in this chart just kind of identified some of the most relevant areas of the strategic agenda where they're going to hopefully touch and move that needle. We're also working with JFF on 2 different technical advising cohorts through the Network Demonstration Project. One of those is Guided Pathways, and we have 8 out of our 16 community college campuses that are participating. We are just getting that started, and so they'll all go through the institutional transformation assessment, kind of sense-making process, and then really get some customized services that will help them. I think the most important thing is to see where they are in their implementation of Guided Pathways. KCTCS has had a Guided Pathways work group for a while, but they kind of look at it as, we want to implement some best practices, those things that each campus individually chooses to do, but it isn't necessarily a cohesive and comprehensive Guided Pathways model. So we're excited about that progress as well. And then 2 of our 4-year institutions that are working with the JFF NDP, we're already planning to reimagine their advising services and advising support. And so they are very interested in working with the advising services network. Amelia, I think that's connected to NASPA. So,
yes.
So having some opportunities to redesign with best practice experts in the field, I think that'll really help move their initiatives forward. And then as a result of many of these campus meetings and campus visits that we've had, student basic needs, was just mentioned over and over as a significant barrier and challenge for students, as well as for the campus administrators who are trying to figure out how do we, on the fly disperse this funding to students? What are the processes that we want to put in place? How do we know if it's effective? And not just maybe the emergency aid that they have available, but now with such highlighted need as a result of the pandemic, how do we maximize? How do we help connect students to state benefits? How do we scale our mental health services and offer so much more of this holistic support for students that face food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation challenges, childcare, et cetera. And so this is really the first community of practice that the collaborative is kicking off. And we've got kind of multiple prongs to it. The first prong is a webinar series where we want to just offer some great experts in the field to talk about some student basic needs priorities that the campus has said were their biggest questions. And we've got 5 workshops. We're working with Complete College America to identify speakers and help us host those. Then we also offered to we had 120 people come to our first meeting. And, that represented about 23 different campuses. And so of those, we said, who would like to join us in a facilitate continuous improvement kind of approach or cycle to coordinating your student basic needs services that you have on your campus? I think, we visited one campus where they had 2 or 3 different departments that did not report to the same VP that were all distributing emergency aid. And so, if you want to work on coordinating these services and really providing a really easy, accessible on-ramp for students to know about them and take advantage of them, come and work with us in a more intentional and long-term way. And so we had 7 campuses that volunteered, that raised their hand to participate in that. And SOVA is helping facilitate that first community of practice. And then a third prong of this is really our online platform that we're getting ready to launch in a few weeks. It's going to be called Impact Exchange, where we really hope to scale the mission of the collaborative and a much more organic collaborative where practitioners from across the state will go to this online platform. They can ask a question, their colleagues can respond, anybody can post resources that might be valuable. When the next person comes to ask the same question about emergency aid, the answers, the responses, and the resources are there. We're creating channels. One of ours around student basic needs, be seated with those folks participating in our community of practice, provide them with this online platform, doing the conversation beyond our meetings. So those are the 4 things that, like, boom, we've got a lot of energy and time invested in these. And then there's other things, that are kind of on the horizon that we're looking toward. And I mentioned this Impact Exchange launch in a couple of weeks. We're probably doing a soft launch right out the gate to really get our communities of practice to get in there and engage with one another. And then we'll have a more integrated approach to it during the Student Success Summit, which is just an annual professional development convening that CPE has hosted. It has great attendance and participation from across the state. And this year, the theme, innovation through collaboration. And so that first day we're anticipating is more of like a summit where there's conference sessions and we're going to bring in experts and keynotes. And we really want to focus on how do you, work together better, and how do we, innovate and use those best practices out there to move the needle and make progress. And then day 2 of this summit, we're planning more of a workshop, an institute day, where these teams that are working with us on guided pathways or advising services or student basic needs or guided purpose first will be brought together in their campus team and facilitated to kind of move their work forward, whatever stage of the work that they're in. And so that is what we are looking at for our April event. And then, I mentioned the change leadership integration and just looking for ways that we can provide this support to our campus teams that are trying to do big things. I mean, guided pathways is a big thing, and it's a campus-wide initiative. And so how can we just try to help them be as successful as possible with the tools and approaches to get that buy-in and to really drive, the progress. So we don't necessarily have to dive into the specifics of this change initiative at this moment, but I do really value your feedback and input, because I think that this is one of those pieces, and Beth has been working on this for months already, where we want to make sure that we've got the right content, it's structured in the right way, and it's really integrated to help our campus partners utilize it effectively, like really apply it immediately and see the value of doing something. Because, while, when I've been through kind of facilitator training or what have you, it takes extra time to prepare for a meeting that you want to facilitate well. And so they're going to be putting in time up front, but to see that ROI immediately is, I think, some of the value that we're hoping to add to our campus partners. So we'll definitely have follow-up conversation around more of the details once we kind of map it out even further. So just, that's what we have. Would love to kind of transition to thoughts from you all. We convene this advisory group so that we weren't just operating in our own silos of, this is what I know is happening in my small little bubble of awareness. You know, we really want to be able to tap into the greatest things that are happening across the country through your different organizations or the networks that you're a part of, and ask us some of those hard questions. I didn't see this, you know, in your agenda. Is this a part of your work? Or how are you making sure that this is a piece of the things that you're doing? You know, we're really, you know, not just this first 6 months, but the next 2 to 3 years, trying to think a little bit further down the road of what else is there that we really need to be maybe preparing for in advance. And then just kind of an overall context, our folks are exhausted. You know, our campus partners are talking about initiative fatigue. You know, they've been running this marathon through the pandemic for the last 2 years. And even if we offered them some of the most amazing resources available, unless it's just the cold hard cash, like there's a hesitancy to take advantage or to join in because they're, you know, extremely exhausted. So just kind of thinking and advice around what have you seen that's been working and helping to create urgency, but to create excitement around some of this work that's really essential for our campus partners and our students, really. And then, of course, any ideas that you have on other ways that you'd love to be involved, like, hey, Lily, can I lead a session at your summit? Yes. So you just let me know whatever ways you think you would like to continue engaging and supporting, you know, beyond just like my individual email outreach to you all and the twice annual meetings that we hope to have. Nick?
Thank you for that overview. Do you want us to jump in and just kind of give reactions now?
Yes, please.
Excellent, thank you. I have an idea kind of bubbling up, and you know, maybe we just want to tamper it down. I don't know, but on this data and evidence part, I think it was the second bullet on that kind of arrow for these interactions and convenings. I think it would help me just have a conversation, not now, but at some point, on what counts as evidence, what counts as quality evidence, how certain are we in what we know, those kind of considerations I think are going to be useful for me, almost like an internal rubric to sort of say, you know, we've got a lot of evidence about this particular thing, but none of it's good, or we don't have a lot of evidence, but the little bit we do, we think it has a lot of value. But like, you know, anything in between those extremes, I think might be a useful way to kind of like almost have a rubric to help guide some of the conversations around kind of what counts as being meaningful evidence. And if we can weigh in and help, if that's a desirable conversation to have, I'd be happy to help give some context and just kind of weigh in.
Absolutely. And, you know, Nick, I don't know if you just kind of meant that in the context of the change leadership or the leadership piece, but also with all of these initiatives that we're working on, that we're working with our campuses on, I think identifying the data and the evidence as well to see if this Purpose First initiative moved the needle. You know, how do we know that at the end of the 12 months or the 2 years? And even if what are the leading indicators, and not just the quantitative, but some of that quality piece too.
I think so. Just kind of getting creative with the options and getting a sense of what each of us values as, you know, as evidence. We all have different ways of knowing in those ways. It might be helpful to have that. And on that point about evaluation, I guess some of it's kind of like justifying decision-making. You know, we use evidence to justify decision-making all the time. But it could also be generating new evidence through this process and using this as an opportunity to develop and to test and to evaluate and to do some of the research ongoing that we might not use to inform our decision making necessarily, but could at least kind of build some of that for maybe you know, some institutional memory or something, however you want to think about it.
You know, I want to jump in here if you don't mind, Nick. That's what I interpreted you as saying in the beginning, actually. I mean, to use really a scholastic way of building new evidence even. And so to me, that's what I think is really good about one of the things that I think is really good about this opportunity. How do we think of generating new knowledge, right? More than just how we are doing our work better, but how are we generating new best practices, if you want to call it. I haven't got my mind wrapped around that term best practice as much as a researcher myself, as much as I have around evidence-based knowledge that can be used to actually push forward new ways of doing business or better ways of doing business. So did I get that's what your primary meeting was? Yeah, I like that.
Lily, I would just underscore the danger of initiative fatigue that you mentioned. I see and value the focus on outcomes and benefiting our students and making change for the better, but somehow we need to be also concurrently cognizant of how is it going to make their lives easier, administrators, faculty, how is it going to advance their professional and personal objectives.
Wait a minute, did I go past?
I'd like to keep that in mind as we move forward, and the benefits for them extrinsically and intrinsically.
No.
Yeah, can I piggy?
Allison, I missed you. Can't hear you.
Tech problems, right?
I hear you now, Allison. Now I don't. It's like red light, green light.
See?
Now,
Oh, wait, can you hear me now?
yes, I can, loud and clear.
Oh, sorry, there's such a strong possibility that my tech challenges will unmute me right at the moment that I'm cursing loudly. I'm so frustrated with this. But I just want to underscore, Joe, what you're saying about and I so appreciate, Lily, how you are approaching the work with such intentionality to connect the dots for people, to supply what people need, to take seriously some of the things that are a little squishier with respect to change, sort of building people's capacity and appetite and resilience around change leadership for the work. The initiative fatigue piece and the kind of continuous effort to connect the dots for people to the felt needs that they have, to the things that are actually driving their attention day to day, or that are driving their sense of pressure, I think is so important. And so I just want to sort of underscore what Joe just said about, sort of taking that initiative fatigue thing seriously, but also not being unduly daunted by it, because the fact is that people do have the time and energy and resilience for the things that they can see the clear connections between the, sort of what drives their days. And so even thinking about leadership development in this, I think one of the things and change leadership, that we have been thinking about, sort of continuously is that the people, the different levels of folks, sort of mid-level, whether that, who I would call anybody between the provost basically and frontline faculty and staff at your institutions, those people who are tasked with leading are tasked with leading in the absence of formal authority to actually require change. And that's something that is, I think, sort of persistently underappreciated in leadership development approaches and in change management or change leadership approaches. And so the extent to which you're helping equip people with things that actually help them in that impossible job of leading in the absence of formal authority to make change is really important. And then kind of under that, or maybe over that, is to kind of protect your own resilience and your own hope and optimism and, ability to do this work, because it is profoundly countercultural. And I think it's draining for people to think about trying to fix broken things, but it's a little bit less draining when we think of it unwinding things that actually are operating the way that they were designed to, unfortunately, right, as sort of invidious sorting mechanisms. And so, whether it's transfer or comprehensive remediation reform, or, there's just there are a lot of pieces around sort of the psychological capital in this work that I think you have a tremendous opportunity to attend to here, and have just been really impressed with the intentionality that you're bringing to the work.
Well, since there's a lull in the action, no, you didn't kill the convo, Allison. I just like to, first of all, reinforce what Allison said, and very well articulated, and maybe swing back to Nick and Aaron's talk about best practices and data. What I heard this morning that excites me, not that I needed more excitement, was, this whole idea of best practices. As I'm struggling with that. I think, as Aaron intimated he was. Sometimes best practices are just popular practices to me. I don't really see the hard data. I would love for us to be mindful of whatever HIPs are out there, these high impact practices, but use the collective wisdom of this group to generate new ones or combine them in synergistic kind of ways. That excites me personally and professionally, to be working with you, not to replicate or duplicate practices that may or may not work on particular campuses, but to innovate and collaborate to generate some real exciting new ideas that may realize multiple outcomes simultaneously. So I don't know, maybe that's just sort of the win it for the old Gippert comment by me at the end, but reevaluating what is evidence, as Nick is saying. It may not be good evidence, or in some cases, these best practices I don't see being supported. Where's peer leadership in all the HIP practices? The power of helping peers, for example, to me, completely missing, despite tons of data supporting the value of that. I like to hope we can think outside the box and really draw on data that is well documented, and look for strategies to collect new data to add to the compendium of what really truly are high impact practices.
I'm so
I
glad
didn't kill the combo.
No, you didn't, Joe. I just wanted to say, I think that is exactly what we were hoping for from this group, because we can read about a best practice or, we can read the literature, but if we just step back a little bit and start connecting dots and think of new ideas, I think that would be very exciting for this group to help us come up with some of those ideas.
I wanted to add something about the comment about initiative fatigue. And in thinking about how to make sure that people see the connections to work or priorities that are already existing in the state. And even if that means creating a visual that does that.
Yes.
Here's how what we're doing relates to this specific strategic priority within the state, or even if it's institutional or whatever it is. I think sometimes you can tell people and they know, advisory design is important and it's something they should be doing, but how is this going to play to both the bottom line as well as like what could potentially be asked of me or mandated of me from the legislature or anything else. So don't underestimate the use of visuals as it relates to like, how are people able to make connections of what it is that they're doing and how it relates to what they're already doing or required to do.
It's a great suggestion, Naeem. In terms of creating or documentation, I think I'd like to add one more. Lily, I hope this doesn't sound like a long list of your to-do items after this meeting from us, but this one I think might be an easy one. And I'm looking ahead, dreaming big, imagining that at some point this advisory group will disband, and there'll be great work already in place, seeds planted. At some point when this becomes the successful effort that we're designing it to be, someone will look at Kentucky and say, how did you all pull this off? How did you do this? I think at the early start right now, this is a great time to create, it's very simple, but it works, a major decisions log. And I say that because, Nicholas, your point about evidence, I think there will be several best practices that emerge from this, ones that got created in Kentucky without having to look outside of that. But it may be easy to lose the breadcrumbs that led to that point. So if we decide to use a certain key data set, that's where we pull all of our major decisions from. I think that's worth noting. And I think along the way, it doesn't have to be frequent, but at least maybe every quarter or every 6 months or so, maybe after these meetings or otherwise, as you reach major milestone points, documenting those, I think, will be essential, just for the sake of saying we're creating a blueprint for how other states might look at doing this work. So not too much documentation, but just a shameless plug for some documentation in that way.
I love that.
You know, I guess I want to say one other thing. I'm listening to you all, and Melissa's right. This is exactly what we're hoping it to be. And Deborah, I think, is on the line somewhere. But there's a lot of other items that I guess I just want to bring to our attention that's important to make sure this work continues. One is that, yes, we're producing something new information, a new quote unquote best practice, but also that we are really moving the dial. I love the major decision points, as well as connecting what we're doing as much as we can quantitatively with some of the outputs, but also don't want to lose the qualitative elements to this. And that's why I think, you know, I want to go back to what Nick was saying. Part of good research is also developing the collaborative process that gets good research and good process done. So I want us to think more holistically. I ate peanuts for lunch just then, by the way, so sorry, it's in my throat. I want us to capture that too, right? And I also want to make sure that we have an idea of how students are affected as much as we can from that qualitative end. So I would hope we consider all of those pieces as we are jumping into this. So that's my little 2 cents.
Well, just to reinforce that, Aaron, the flashback I got as you were talking about that are meetings that I've had on my own campus and other campuses where we're trying to induce change. And you've got all the charts with the quantitative gains, the histograms, the flow charts, the quantitative data. And then, you know, you'd have a portion of the presentation that was basically content analysis of students' experiences or how programs impacted them personally. And I'm looking around the room, and when the shift was made, not that the quantitative stuff didn't appeal to certain portions of the audience, but those poignant comments by students about how this program or experience impacted their lives, it was a totally different route for instituting change. I don't know, I was trying to group them, where the humanities people seem to be more affected by this than the social science people were more affected by the quantitative data, but we need both. And sometimes hearing the voices of those students, you know, what's an anecdote? 3 or 4, and you've got critical anecdotes, but when you start seeing trends and you can capture the impact of the efforts on the students' lives, that's a powerful change mechanism to me, in addition to good evidence collection.
Well, I've been taking many pages of notes today, so I really appreciate insights and thoughtful questions and advice for us. I know we're right there at the end. Dr. Thompson, I don't know if you wanted to wrap us up or any final thoughts from the group.
I'll take, when we get some final thoughts from the group, then I just have about 30 seconds of something to say. Joe, I thought you would say something, man. I lost the bet to myself.
I guess I just, yeah, I'm sure you're going to address this. I'm happy what we accomplished now. I guess it's the segue to the next step that I would help me at this point.
Well, that's part of my 30 seconds. Lily, this was our introductory thing. We understand that your time is valuable and you don't want to take it all up with us, but we like your brains. I just got off the phone with Deborah here talking about how impressed she was with this group. You know, and I am too. So as we segue to the next level, knowing we're already hitting the ground working big time, so we're not waiting on a lot of things, but we also want to be able to have some sort of, with the lack of a better phrasing, real-time input from you all, not just when we get together in meetings. So we want that flow to happen at will, Joe, and to answer your question, so a segue is probably going to happen in multiple forms. In other words, if there's some particular, each of you bring to the table rich knowledge, but you know, not all of you have the same knowledge, right? And so there's going to be things we're going to be inviting you all to the table to specifically give us knowledge on some things we're doing. And then as a group, so segueing into this, Joe, maybe something individually given as well as a group given, but Lily will be, and she'll tell you that in a second, will be following up on next steps. But I guess I just want to thank you for being a part of this group. Thank you for what I think is innovative in such a level that it's going to be something that we're going to try to put into what I call the higher ed infrastructure in the way that we're going to be doing business from now on in Kentucky, but hopefully others will follow suit. So thank you all very much. Appreciate you letting me be a part of this nice group too. Lily?
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I have two follow-ups. So in addition to the individual outreaches to you all to kind of keep conversations going and pick your brains on different topics, I would like to offer kind of for anybody who would like to join, like this is an area that you're passionate about and you would like to talk to us about our change leadership kind of effort that we're trying to move forward. We would love to have you at the table. And so I will just send a broad email out to everybody. I'll look at a date that's, you know, a couple of dates about a month or so down the road and see what might work for folks if you'd like to participate. So do not have to at all, but if that is something that you would like to help give us some insights and feedback, we would so love it. Thank you, Allison. And then another piece, you know, is around our Student Success Summit and Institute that's coming up. And, you know, we're still in the formative stages of the framework of that, you know, with some of the details, but I would love to maybe 2 months down the road, just throw out another invitation for folks. If you'd like to give us some insights on what you see as some of the pieces that would really, I think, what are the conversations we really need to be sparking at this summit and as we're working with our groups through their institute. So I'll follow up with those two opportunities and really just look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Yay, it's Friday.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you.